Sony had an absolutely incredible run with the PlayStation 2 as it received an incredible amount of first-party titles, third-party support, and it had a full DVD player built in. This was everything that made it so important in the early 2000s. During the gaming generation where a well-loved competitor, Sega, dropped out entirely and Nintendo was doing poorly compared to Sony and even Microsoft, the PlayStation 2 became the most successful home console ever made. But both Microsoft and Nintendo had massive plans for the 7th generation. The Xbox 360 was an explosive release for Microsoft, and the Wii finally brought Nintendo back on the spotlight. But what happened to Sony? Well, they also had massive plans for this platform, but it didn't pan out the way we all thought it would. This was a PlayStation 3, and it really could have been so much better. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. I'm doing my master's in art education, and let me tell you, regardless of your subject area, you need a smartboard. The HKMLC smartboard is exactly what you should get, as it has Android support baked in, all essential Google apps for slideshows, document writing, and so much more, as well as insanely loud speakers and a touchscreen for writing and drawing, optimizing for student engagement. This is the one I will use when I start officially teaching, as chances are that your old smartboard is already showing its age. Because if you want your presentations to truly stand out to all of your students, then the best course of action is to get yourself a nice panel like this one that will actually allow those colors to pop in the classroom. This is 4K. It's time to upgrade. Use my affiliate link in the description to help out the channel and upgrade your chalkboard or even antiquated smartboard. And special thanks to HKMLC for sponsoring this video. The PlayStation 3 was a very anticipated console. When the PlayStation 3 was initially announced, it looked very different aesthetically from the PlayStation 2, but it is very similar, if not identical, to the final product. Although the controller was this strange silver boomerang, almost alien-like. It's very difficult to describe beyond what I just said, but this is such an exciting reveal to say the least. Sony looked like they were trying something completely new, but when it was revealed, it was clear that it needed more time in the oven. While the original Xbox didn't sell as much as it could have, it helped to create a name for Microsoft and was a very well-loved system. As such, when Microsoft was the first one to jump into the 7th generation with the Xbox 360, people were very excited. Many more people were willing to see what Microsoft had in store this time. When Sony revealed the PlayStation 3, it really was touted to be absolutely monstrous in terms of what it could achieve performance-wise, and it had a vast array of I/O, including 4 USB-A ports on the front, and on the back an additional 2 USB-A ports, 3 entire Ethernet ports, 2 HDMI ports, an AV port, an optical audio port, a power switch, and the power connector. So in November of 2006, Sony finally unveiled the final design for the PlayStation 3 and along with its true controller. This console is absolutely massive, but it comes packed with so many bells and whistles. The PlayStation 2 is a relatively lightweight and sleek design, while the PlayStation 3 has many more curves, championing a glossy finish, and its logo now has the Spider-Man font. But Sony seemed to have scaled back on a lot of the plans for this device, as you will see with the ports. On the front, you will find a compact flash slot, an SD card slot, and a Memory Stick Pro 2 slot. You will also find the 4 USB-A ports, some vents, and some touch-sensitive eject and power reset buttons, which are right under the brand new Blu-ray drive. This technology was being embraced by only Sony this time around, and with good reason. Blu-rays could hold up to 25 gigabytes of storage compared to what a DVD could hold, which was only 4.7 gigabytes. And a dual-layered Blu-ray could hold up to 50 gigabytes instead. These came a little bit later, but this is important to note because Blu-rays also support much higher resolutions for video and lossless audio, which is important for a device that was also used for media consumption. The Xbox 360 only supported DVDs, and this was a genuine advantage that it held over it. Then on the left side, you will find a hard drive bay, which is also worth noting as now we are moving towards needing a lot more storage for digital purchases and storing DLC or even save data. This is the generation where we could finally stop using memory cards that could fill up with saves only. These drives should last a lot longer, as these launched with options of either 20 gigabytes or 60 gigabytes versus the 8 megabyte cards of years prior. Then on the back you will find an AV port for use with composite and component cables, an optical port, a single HDMI port, and a single Ethernet port with the power related buttons and ports towards the right side, and a giant cooling vent. As you can see, many of the ports that had been originally announced for the PlayStation 3 were axed, and we were left with a lot less. It's important to note that the PlayStation 3 launched with many important features such as Bluetooth, as now they don't meddle with wired-only controllers, and the main way of playing is wirelessly. This also has Wi-Fi built in, which is a huge deal as online gaming will truly become a cornerstone of what makes the 7th generation so impactful. But my favorite feature is how the PlayStation 3 was built to be fully backwards compatible with the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, allowing you to just insert a disc and play whatever you want. On top of that, this wasn't achieved through emulation, but these PS2 games were being played natively with the advantage that you can play these on a modern display through HDMI with no need for an external upscaler or converter. All of these features sounds great, but there ended up being a lot of revisions of what we now call the fat model. This one here is one of those revisions, and they removed 2 of those USB-A ports from the front, as well as every single port from what is now a welded shut plastic panel. And the worst exclusion being the removal of native backwards compatibility with PlayStation 2 games. Now it's just emulation due to the removal of the Emotion engine from later models. As mentioned earlier, that wonky boomerang controller that was initially revealed was replaced with what they called the 6-axis controller, which looks like the natural evolution of the DualShock 2 controller. They kept almost every flaw and quirk from the previous one, including the exact same form factor, the same directional buttons, the same face buttons, and the same less than optimal thumbsticks. I have never liked these thumbsticks because they have always felt slippery and cheap. But with this iteration, this controller is now wireless from the factory, and it charges over mini USB, which saved many from having to buy new batteries all of the time. This was a great choice. This was also a 6-axis controller, as it now features a full gyroscope and motion controls, but it sadly did not include rumble functionality due to a legal dispute with a certain company that argued about Sony's implementation of haptics in previous controllers. Only the consumer lost out in this case. This was later rectified with the release of the DualShock 3 controller, which is almost completely identical to the original 6-axis controller, except that it is now slightly heavier and has rumble. So with all of this in mind, it is safe to say that Sony was riding the high of being so overwhelmingly successful with the PS2. So much so that they made some very serious investments into the PlayStation 3 as a platform. As such, when the PlayStation 3 launched in November 2006, Sony released 2 models. There was the 20GB model with no chrome trimming, flash card readers of any kind, or Wi-Fi that launched at $499. Then the model that people really wanted the most, that came with everything I mentioned, and a 60GB hard drive on top of that, launched at $599. This was unheard of in the home console market, and it came as a huge surprise when Sony had been the most consumer-friendly of the bunch. But Sony was selling these at a massive loss, as they were selling these for roughly $200 less than what it cost them to make. This was such an expensive platform due to every modern and future-proof feature that they baked in, even considering that Blu-ray readers were pretty expensive on their own. This was absolutely ridiculous. With that aside, the PlayStation 3 adopted an interface that PSP owners were enjoying, as this one does still look really nice to this day. It was just simple and clean with a wave in the background constantly running, and you could manage downloads, PlayStation Store for buying games and movies, music players, Wi-Fi settings, photos, stored content of any kind, and more. This was a gorgeous interface that really looks amazing on an HD TV. The PlayStation 3 was a beautiful console, but there were simply so many hurdles in the way that caused PlayStation as a platform and a name to lose momentum and begin losing steam throughout. And it all started from its unfortunately received launch and continued through everything that came later. That's not even acknowledging how cocky Sony was at this time, with quotes such as, "Our goal for PlayStation 3 is for consumers to think to themselves, I will work for hours to buy one. Want people to feel that they want it, irrespective of anything else." But little did they know, they were set for a reality check shortly after. There were many complications regarding the PlayStation 3's hardware, and some of those did affect the kinds of games and rate of releases, as well as quality control that caused problems for gamers. But there were many things that the PlayStation 3 still did well. These are the games that made the most of the PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 2 was known for being a console whose hardware was underutilized. Sony had created the Emotion Engine chip, which was in theory more capable than what the Dreamcast offered and could technically achieve more than even the GameCube when put into the right hands. The Emotion Engine was set to handle particle effects more readily, reflections, as well as facial expressions and emotions in ways that the competition never got around to during the 6th generation. But it was more difficult to program for, which caused a lot of its ports to look worse than they did on other platforms. But games that utilized the Emotion Engine chip well ended up looking better on the PlayStation 2. Either way, the PlayStation 2 was a weaker console compared to the GameCube and the Xbox, which pushed Sony to want to develop a CPU and GPU combination that would prove to be exceptional in terms of performance. This is when the Cell processor comes into play, and it showcases raw power with a 3.2 GHz CPU with a total of 8 threads that developers could take advantage of. However, this was still a complex platform to program and develop for, as this technically wasn't one that was meant for game development to begin with. So while you do have a lot of power behind the CPU, developers had to somehow develop incredible experiences for a platform that wasn't friendly to their needs. On the development side of things, those who worked on games had a more difficult time porting or programming for the PlayStation 3. But on the consumer side, we were seeing some consoles start to fail. The yellow light of death comes to mind, as this would be triggered due to a few different hardware-related failures or issues such as overheating, potentially causing the solder joints of the CPU to become detached from the board. Other issues such as power supply concerns, system errors, bad ribbon cables, and many more factors went into causing the yellow light of death. However, for those that did get to make the most out of their PlayStation 3s, those users got to enjoy the introduction of the PlayStation Network, which was a free online service with servers being supported by Sony. It wasn't the best service, especially considering that Sony was fronting all of the costs for these servers to work, and as such, they weren't as good as a paid Xbox Live service. Regardless of this fact, many people were willing to deal with a less reliable service if it meant that it was free. And even if there were hiccups in the gaming experience, the PlayStation 3 received an absolutely amazing selection of games for this generation. I wouldn't say that the launch titles for the PlayStation 3 really helped to sell it very much, as there just wasn't that much interest for Madden, NBA 2K7, and such, especially as these games did not look that much better than the PlayStation 2 game. But it's the titles that started pouring in later that really sold the PlayStation 3 in the long run. Games like The Last of Us offered an amazing narrative to follow, and it is one of the more well-remembered games from this generation. Uncharted games also offered a lot of fun to gamers, and it definitely was one of the most important games on this platform specifically, as it was exclusive to Sony here. A series of games that helped to show how powerful this generation of consoles were was the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. These games looked absolutely amazing, even if the story and even gameplay are divisive for many. I thought the games were lots of fun, and they've aged incredibly well visually. Some other incredible exclusives include Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots, Heavy Rain, Infamous 2, the Kingdom Hearts remasters, which were really good on this platform, Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm, the first one, Journey, Little Big Planet 1 and 2, God of War 3, Demon's Souls, Bayonetta, Final Fantasy XIV, even if it was available on PCs at the time, and more games that I enjoyed a lot. And as for some of the other incredible titles that we got later on in the cycle that were available on the 360 and the PlayStation 3, these are going to include Assassin's Creed 1, Brotherhood, 2, Revelations, and yes, even Assassin's Creed 3 were tons of fun. Dark Souls 1 and 2 also came out on this platform, and while Dark Souls 1 was very well loved, Dark Souls 2 definitely disappointed a lot of fans, but they were both really good. Games like The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion were very well received because it was such a deep game with lots to do, even if the visuals were somewhere between a last-gen title and a current-gen one. But The Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim was a huge visual update and the biggest entry into the Elder Scrolls series ever. It was released absolutely everywhere for many years to come. Call of Duty Black Ops was also massive at this time, and games like BioShock 1, 2, and Infinite were huge entries here too. That's not even to mention the Mass Effect games, the Dragon Ball Raging Blast games, Xenoverse towards the end of the generation, the many Ultimate Ninja Storm games, which include 2, Generations, 3, and Revolution, the many Rock Band and Guitar Hero titles with their respective accessories, Street Fighter 4, Portal 2, Red Dead Redemption, Grand Theft Auto 4, Killzone 2, Far Cry 3, Fallout 3, LA Noire, Dead Space 2, Dishonored, Hotline Miami, Minecraft, Crysis 1 and 2, among so many incredible experiences through this entire generation. This was one of the best times to be alive as a gamer and to be as involved as possible in this scene. But of course, the most impactful game of this generation as it was released when it was just about to end was Grand Theft Auto 5. Much more significant later, but the GTA games were at their biggest this generation. It simply can't be understated how impactful this generation was in the gaming space. We had so many incredible experiences available on every single platform, and the PlayStation 3 proved to be no exception at the end of it all. The PlayStation 3 managed to squeeze in many amazing experiences for gamers, but many of the hardware concerns and pricing issues had to be addressed throughout this generation to ensure that it became as accessible as possible. This fat model had a bunch of different revisions, including different storage sizes, the removal of hardware backwards compatibility with PS2 games, the removal of different ports, and more. But the best revision for the PlayStation 3 came with a slim model. In 2009, we got the PlayStation 3 Slim. The PlayStation 3 Slim was an improvement from the fat model in almost every single regard. The PS3 Slim is considerably smaller than the original model, but it is still hefty and does still occupy a pretty large footprint, even if it looks better and it still fits better into most people's homes. This is especially interesting when you think about how Sony took a PlayStation 2 model and somehow shrunk it to be astronomically compact. The Slim model for the PS3 is still noticeably larger than a fat PS2. I will never stop acknowledging this, but it needed to still be relatively large because the PlayStation 3's hardware runs really hot and it needs all of that space in order to remain properly cooled. It now features a matte texture, which was a point of contention with the original glossy finish, which was a fingerprint magnet. The Slim model has a new PS3 logo that is a little more iconic, even if a little more muted than the more aggressive logo from the original. On the front, you will find your set of two USB-A buttons, and the hard drive bay is now more accessible than before. The sleep, wake, and eject buttons are still in the same location, and they are now physical buttons with actual feedback when pressed. On the back, you will find an Ethernet port, HDMI port, AV port, power connector, cooling vents, and an optical audio port. Those two USB ports on the back of the system were removed, and of course, there was no hardware backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 3. This had been removed from the later revisions of the fat model, but the Slim ones definitely don't have them either. The Slim system is a special edition console themed after Final Fantasy XIII, and I believe it looks absolutely amazing. This is the generation where we started seeing more special edition consoles actually hit North America. Sony would also bundle the PlayStation 3 Slim with 120GB hard drives at the lowest end and 320GB hard drives at the highest end, which is a huge improvement from the highest that we ever got on the fat models, that being 160GB and only 60GB at launch in 2006. However, the PlayStation 3 Slim addresses a lot of issues with the hardware and the original fat models. The PS3 Slim models are essentially immune to the yellow light of death that plagued the original models, as it is more energy efficient and it generates less heat, which causes the Slim model to be more reliable. It is also quieter compared to the fat variant, while looking a lot better in my opinion. The Slim model launched at a huge price cut compared to the original fat model, being released at $299, half of what the highest end OG model cost. This helped to make the PS3 much more accessible to many others who had been apprehensive previously, or that maybe lost their Xbox 360 due to its lingering red ring of death issues and just wanted to migrate. Now things were looking up for Sony, and the PlayStation 3 as the competition grew steadily with major pushes from the Xbox 360, as even Microsoft responded in kind to the Slim's release with their own S model for only $199 in 2010. But in 2011, something terrible happened to PlayStation 3 owners, as many of them were stripped of the ability to play online or access PlayStation Network settings. This caused a lot of concerns, even leading to many lawsuits and growing pains within those who remained loyal to Sony through all of these years. This was the sudden shutdown of PSN, and hackers were responsible. That same year, Sony had threatened legal action against two individuals who were involved, which were two hackers known as GeoHot and Graph_Chocolo over the work that they've done in identifying vulnerabilities in Sony's hardware and working on exploits to potentially install custom firmware. This would have been done through a feature that came in every PlayStation 3 system called Install Other OS, as it was previously used to install Linux on it. When Sony became aware of people attempting to install custom firmware on the PlayStation 3 through this feature, they removed it entirely through a system update. So Graph_Chocolo was responsible for creating an unofficial patch that would restore this functionality and even offer more flexibility for homebrew. Sony ended up filing a court order against these two individuals, which caused the well-known hacker group known as Anonymous to respond in turn, stating Sony had attacked their friends and that they wouldn't let it go. It was commonly believed that Anonymous attacked the PlayStation Network, causing it to shut down for 3 days. This meant that you couldn't play games online on your PlayStation 3 whatsoever during that time, but Anonymous had realized that this attack was hurting consumers more than it was affecting Sony themselves, so they halted this attack for the time being. Shortly after, Sony themselves decided to shut down the PlayStation Network temporarily, as they worked to resolve many things on the back end, because it turned out that the data of millions of users may have been leaked and exposed, including email addresses, account information, purchase histories, payment details, and more. PSN ended up going down for roughly 23 days until Sony released a press conference where they apologized for the inconvenience and offered 2 free games and 30 days of PSN for free, because Sony did eventually start charging an annual fee for PSN. Even after all of this happened, Anonymous was never technically found guilty of any wrongdoing, nor were there any arrests associated with this hacking. No one really knows who pulled this off, but every PlayStation 3 owner that played games online at the time felt like they lost a lot of value. On the bright side, your single-player games became untouched for the exception of trophy syncing. This was something that PlayStation 3 owners never really forgot about. The PlayStation 3 had gone through many obstacles since its launch in 2006, but Sony really believed in this platform, so they kept supporting it as much as possible. Many games were still being released, with Skyrim being a massive title seen in 2011, and Assassin's Creed being at its most popular at this point, releasing a brand new entry to the series, Assassin's Creed 3. But this wasn't the only thing that we saw coming out in October of 2012, because Sony launched a whole new PlayStation 3 model. This is now the Super Slim. PS3 Super Slim was introduced at a time where the PlayStation 3 was beginning to be phased out, as Sony had much bigger plans for the near future. This hardware revision is what I would consider to be a true slim model, as it is significantly smaller than the fat model, and it does have a noticeably smaller footprint compared to the original Slim, even if it is still kind of big. So frankly, it just became impossible to go back to the PS2 Slim style of consoles, as these units just have much more demanding cooling and space requirements. On the front, you will find 2 USB-A ports, a power button, and an eject button. On the back, you will find the exact same ports as before, which includes an Ethernet port, HDMI port, AV port, optical audio port, and a power connector. The hard drive bay was moved to the right side behind this plastic cover. The Super Slim came in 2 models, one that included a 250GB hard drive for $270, and you could even pay $30 more to get the 500GB model. This was much more significant because people are purchasing games digitally much more frequently than before. But of course, another big change with the Super Slim is the sliding door mechanism for the disc, as it doesn't use a motorized Blu-ray drive like before. These are much more reliable when it comes to durability, which is why some people prefer the Super Slim. But this one wasn't really affordable enough to become too popular, as it launched at basically the same price as the original Slim model, but of course, Sony had already been preparing for the next big thing. Sony saw its most challenging run in the gaming console race with the PlayStation 3, as they believed that they were on top of the world, since they sold about 3 times as many PS2s as the entire competition did combined at that time. They really believed that the PlayStation 3 would be their biggest console release ever, and they built it with the intention that it could last about 10 years before it needed to be replaced with its successor. They did not anticipate the reception from consumers upon revealing its launch price, or the issues that developers would come across when porting or even developing games for it, or the hardware-related issues that came about a little bit later, or even the network outages that came. But what Sony truly failed to recognize above all else is how strong the competition would be this time. The Wii was selling exceptionally well, as it didn't even compete with the PlayStation 3 or the 360, because everyone had one alongside one of those systems. And the Xbox 360 was a more budget-friendly and developer-friendly system, with hit after hit coming out on it too. The PlayStation 3 just wasn't going to be on top, and Sony was forced to realize why so many things went wrong. The PlayStation 3 deserves so much better, but so many mistakes were made with the system. PS3 was incredibly powerful, but difficult to develop for, which is why we didn't start seeing its best games until the end of the generation. But it can't be denied how exciting it was to be a gamer at this time, since everyone had incredible offerings, becoming the most competitive generation in all of gaming. The Xbox 360 sold 84 million units, which was a massive success in Microsoft's eyes. The Wii, likewise, was incredibly lucrative for Nintendo as they sold 100 million units, beating Microsoft and Sony this generation. PlayStation 3 still managed to outsell the 360 by selling 87.4 million units, but they were almost neck and neck. This, however, landed Sony right in the middle, at second place. They were not satisfied, as they definitely expected much more from the PlayStation 3, but the truth is that we were all expecting more, and expecting better. Sony was forced to rethink their entire strategy as the PlayStation 3 lifetime sales were somewhat disappointing, so they worked very hard on how to turn everything around and bring as many gamers as possible back on their platform. This was their answer, and their second most successful game console of all time. We will talk about this one very soon, so stay tuned and subscribe so that you don't miss it. Now, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments about any topics you'd like me to touch on for a bite-sized documentary or a video like this. And until next time.